Hello. So Sille is the program lead at MyData Global, and I think I can safely say that she is one of the driving forces behind MyData. Also active on many areas, but her interests include data in connection with cities, and she will present some cases of personal data in connections with cities next. So Sille, please.
Thank you. I will share my screen, and can you confirm that you also see the slide?
Yes, I can.
Very good. So hello everyone, and really big thanks to the for the invitation to this event, and also thank you for the fellow presenters for the great talks already. Really interesting and relevant points shared already, and I hope that my presentation can also build on top of that. So my name is Sille Sepp, and as Gert already mentioned, I'm the programs lead at MyData Global. And in my talk, I will be sharing a little bit more about the bigger picture around the idea of my data, human-centric approach to personal data, and how to also make it happen in the context of cities where we might live, or cities where we might what we might visit. Um, I will go through four main points, share a little bit about why are we even talking about this, why is this a relevant question, then share a little bit more about what is even MyData and what is MyData Operators as infrastructures for those who might have not heard about MyData. Then to look at a little bit also for the use cases and who is putting it in practice, especially for the cities as entities, and also look into the future of what's next, what still needs to be developed. So without any further ado, let's dive in right away into the first part, which is why are we even talking about this? So when you're thinking about the cities that you're living in or that you visited, you surely right away also notice and realize that cities are much more than just the built environment around us. Cities as ecosystems consist of many different services and bring together the different stakeholders to make those services happen. Uh, those services are becoming increasingly much more digital. Cities are building, deploying different sensors, different devices and technologies that make it possible to collect more and more data about the surrounding environment, of course, but also data about people living in the city and the practices that happen on a day-to-day basis. And we can say that cities are building a so-called digital twin with whom are on based to deliver then services much faster, much more efficiently. And much of this data is also personal data. And the sharing and the reuse of personal data is also becoming increasingly important for cities in order to provide digital services to their citizens in a much more personalized and better way. And yeah, due to also the recent developments in data analytics, AI, machine learning, all this makes it possible also for the paradigm shift that like even Ruben mentioned, that there is a need for being from reactive to become more proactive. And cities want to do that as well to serve their citizens in a much more personalized way. Cities are particular though, that when they're doing that, they are usually working together with private sector entities that would then build those services for them. And private sector entities are also often much more technologically developed. Their business logic might be around capturing as much of the market as possible. And one of the strategies to do that is to provide end-to-end technologies, which can leave cities dependent on certain standards, certain products, and also locked in with certain private sector entities for those tech companies for many years. And with that in mind, there's also a quite urgent need for cities to become much more capable to ensure that the infrastructures that are built, the tools that are used, the services that are developed are built responsibly and sustainably, and that the citizens' interests are well protected, and they remain in control over their own data. A couple of examples from around the world. You might be aware of the case in Toronto from a couple of years ago, when the city started or wanted to collaborate with Sidewalk Labs, a part of the company called Alphabet, a parent company of Google. And they started to have this vision for a really high-tech, utopian future city that would deploy a lot of sensors, technologies, and that would gather a lot of data around about the citizens. That caused a lot of alarm in the city, among the citizens, privacy and governance activists, etc. And these concerns ended up or resulted that the city stopped the project. Of course, this is just one case, but it showed how important it is that the citizens are involved, and there's great good governance around how these projects are implemented. A much better example can be brought, for example, from the city of Barcelona in Europe, where the city has for many years already worked to renegotiate this power from the tech companies, and they do it in a way that they would deploy certain provide even certain incentives for the companies and the procurement logic to use open standards, better governance models that also make it possible for the citizens to understand how their data is being used. And for one example is that the ethical digital standards that the city has been put forward. There are, of course, many other cities also working on this and putting their strategies into effect. I would say that this is only increasing in the world to figure out how to make sure that the cities are much more data-driven, but while they're doing that, also be ethical and sustainable in that. So what are the opportunities for cities, and why are they also well positioned for developing human-centric solutions? We could look at cities as entities. Cities as public administrators hold a lot of data. And by sharing and reusing that data with also citizens, they can make and develop quite good innovative services. They can generate meaningful insights for the government as well as for the citizens, and provide services in a much more proactive way. Cities are also responsible for the economic development, for the innovation. They're well positioned to bring all those stakeholders together. And one of the key things is that cities are also responsible to ensure that they stay accountable to their citizens. And when they are successful in that, they are, of course, also much more trusted because they're close to them. And by providing services well to them, citizens might be eager to also work with cities more. Another way to look at it, though, is cities as areas, as environments. And with that, cities are great testing grounds, sandbox areas, and to bring all those stakeholders together and facilitate and convene those interactions and build a trust framework around this. So with that, they are a good and trustworthy partner for piloting and developing those services. One of the key things is also that cities realize that they're just one city among many others, and in order to provide value to to its citizens, to its employers, visitors. They see a need to remove friction when the citizens are moving between cities, and constantly also develop and incentivize the creation of more interoperable services in the wider ecosystem, especially when those citizens would move even across borders. And one important thing that I would like to also highlight is that this is not only an issue of public and private partnerships, the PPP model, but also adding one more P, which is the people. When we would and with that, making sure that the people are involved in those developments, that their voices are heard. And when we would zoom into the last P, then it would could be even the issue of how community initiatives can be built based on data about them. How can they build, for example, data commons, etc. For providing value to the local communities and the individuals there living there. So all of these opportunities and potential are of course great, but it doesn't come without challenges. So that's why we talk about the issues around trust, around sovereignty, ethics, governance, etc. About whose voices are heard when those developments are made, how to ensure that the partnerships that are created are done responsibly and ethically. Which then brings me to the second point of today, which is what is MyData and how can it help those tackle those issues. And also together with the idea of MyData, I would like to introduce a little bit the work around MyData Operators. So for those who haven't heard about the MyData model or the MyData vision, the core idea really is that individuals like you and I should be in control of data about them. And while the notion of control is of course also challenging, many people don't even like that. The idea is that individuals should have a meaningful way to know what data is collected about them, have a say also how it's being used, reshare it and generate insights based on it, and also take it back from companies if they don't want that anymore. The MyData approach aims with that to strengthen the digital human rights of individuals, while then also opening new opportunities for businesses to develop innovative services based on personal data and mutual trust. So it looks on this issue from both sides, both from the individuals as well as businesses. And for the context of cities, this is important because the MyData vision could be deployed across different domains and across sectors. And when you look at even the MyData logo on the left, there are different sectors, like, for example, the train representing mobility and transport, energy, there are health, retail, education, etc. So you could start thinking about how the vision is implemented in this particular domain. MyData vision, of course, needs to be looked at also across different perspectives. It's not only a matter of technology, it's not only a matter of regulation. It needs to be a combination of business, legal, tech, and societal aspects. And that's why we even call this a BLTS sandwich in the MyData community. The MyData vision is developed, implemented, practiced by different individuals and organizations around the world, whom we call the MyData community. And the community is facilitated and supported by the MyData Global organization. So just a few words about the organization as well, that you are familiar with it. The MyData Global organization is an international nonprofit. It consists of both individual members as well as organizations, and we work really hard to keep that balance also represented in the organization, so that the interests of both people and organizations are represented. The organization is also present in over 30 local hubs on 6 different continents. We're missing only Antarctica, and also the thought leadership of MyData is continuously developed by the international thematic groups. And of course, all of these ideas come constantly together on the international conference where some of you might have been also been. The mission and really the core vision of MyData Global Organization is to work towards a fair, sustainable and prosperous digital society. And we see that this is possible only through a human-centric approach to personal data. And this, as I mentioned, looks at both sides. People get the value from their data and set the agenda on how it is used. And on the other hand, organizations, they can use the data, and the ethical use of data is always the most attractive option. And in order to reach that vision, we need to have 3 main shifts in the societies. We need to move from just merely having formal regulatory rights for it to be also actionable and meaningful for individuals on a day-to-day basis to exercise those rights. And secondly, to move away from the understanding that the individuals as data subjects need to be just protected from misuse to the point that the data is also used in a way that can meaningfully empower those individuals and communities. And then finally, that the ecosystems where this data is used and shared opens up so that there would be meaningful competition, meaningful innovation, and for example, I could change between different services when I want to in order to get a better value. So as I mentioned, MyData is a vision, it's an idea, but how to make it real and who's making it real. So one of the key things how to make it real is through the MyData Operators. MyData Operators are the kind of infrastructure level entity in the MyData model, and it was introduced already back in 2014 in the first white paper and in the declaration shortly mentioned as well, together with the roles of data sources, data using services, and the individual, of course, as well. But in order to even understand better what is this operator really about, the thematic group was emerged in last year, and they started studying different real life services that provide these type of services to the individuals. And based on that work, published a white paper last May, I think it was. The core idea around MyData Operators is really that they connect the individual with those roles of the data sources, the data sharing services, the many different sources and data using services in that ecosystem. The operators need different partnerships for this relationship to happen. And operators also secure the activity in a way that all of those entities also follow the MyData guiding principles. And what those guiding principles are described in the MyData declaration. There are 6 of them, and MyData operators help to put these principles into practice. So they help to ensure that human-centric control of personal data is possible, that the individual is a point of integration in those data flows, that they really empower individuals with those insights gathered, that data portability is possible, and accessing and reusing the data. They ensure also that those services and the ways how the data flows are happening are transparent and they remain accountable. And lastly, but not least, that all of those entities become also interoperable. And here, I think the last point is really key, that there might be many, many different types of MyData operators. And like I use today, might have the need to change the telco operator when I want to get a better service. I might also decide to have a different kind of infrastructure for sharing my data if that becomes a need. As the field of MyData operator type services is still very much also evolving, and it has been developing, of course, around the world for many years. And there might have been described with different types of terminology, different types of descriptions. The thematic group also made sure that we don't define it very strictly right away. And instead, it started describing the reference model for a operator type service, which revolved around the 9 core functional elements, what the operator type service might deploy. So some of these functionalities are like identity management, permission management, service management, value exchange, data model management, personal data transfer, personal data storage, governance support and logging and accountability. And different types of services might implement or provide different combination of different kinds of functionalities. What is important though is that, depending on what kind of functionalities are used, it also affects how the human-centric approach to personal data then is put in practice in the end. I won't go through the elements in detail right now due to time, but I do encourage you to go through the white paper and study the functionalities a little bit more. And this work is not visionary. This is happening in real time. And in order to really work bottom up, there was many interactions together with different services from Asia to America, to figure out how are these different services building their infrastructure, how are they providing value to the individuals, and what kind of, for example, governance models they are also providing. These services went through a self-description process last year. They studied also other services models, and they were all 27 of those then were awarded as the MyData operator last year. If you are even thinking about that your service, for example, are similar to the operator type, there are new calls opening up this summer. So I definitely also encourage you to look through this work, and if you're interested, it would be good to also go through this process. As I mentioned throughout during the principles, interoperability is really important in terms of the MyData idea and MyData operators. And one of the things that we have been working quite closely quite much is to ensure that the work that we do really contributes to the journey of interoperability together with those services. That all of those services themselves also commit to striving towards it. And this is important because by providing a kind of ecosystem look to this work and providing meaningful choice to the individuals, these services themselves need to be also interoperable with each other. What does it really mean though? Like what does it mean in terms of technological aspects, governance aspects, business model aspects? This is yet to be defined, and here your contributions are, of course, are also very important and welcome. So with that, I will move now to the point of who is putting the ideas of MyData and MyData operators into practice in the cities. And also we have the understanding of why this is even needed. So let's put these two puzzle pieces together. So a third point today is some of the use cases that we've seen in the world. Like I mentioned, there are many different cities trying to innovate, trying to pilot different services based on the ideas around or similar to MyData. I mentioned already Barcelona. There has been a great project around, of Decode that also Amsterdam was involved, and there has been a lot of work around, for example, the civic tech aspects. The city of Ghent in Belgium has been working closely with a project of Tim Berners-Lee, Solid, that you might be aware of, that is also quite close to the ideas of MyData. There's the city of Helsinki in Finland, which I will talk a little bit more right away. I mentioned already Toronto, Brittany, Rennes in France, Trento in Italy, and Lyon in France, which I will also mention a bit more. So let's zoom into those two. And first of Lyon in France. The city of Lyon has been working quite closely with a think tank called FING in France that went through a project of Mésanfos Territorial. In English, it's called Self-Data Cities. And one of the results of this research was that it's really important for cities to start from use cases and to start from the strategic goals that are anyway important for the cities. So, for example, for the city of Lyon, it was really important to develop good social services and to make sure that the citizens who are needing those social services get a better understanding of what opportunities they have. So they developed a My Social dashboard, a 360 viewpoint kind of about the data that is about them, that also gives an understanding of what kind of possibilities they have for example, different social services. Another example then is from the city of Helsinki that have a data strategy, and the data strategy has put forward that by 2025, data produced by Helsinki is world's most usable and used city data. And they have been advocating quite much about the idea of becoming a proactive versus reactive. And they want to make that based on MyData principles. So they're committing to that also throughout their work. And one example of how they're doing that is through a procurement launched last year, I think, that was looking for a operator service that could build the city as operator service to the city of Helsinki, and they just launched or announced the winner for it in earlier this year, and now it's going to be developed and put in practice. So I'm very interested to see how it will be also implemented and how the citizens will be receiving it. One of the entities to look at is also networks like, for example, the Open and Agile Smart Cities that have been doing a lot of work in the background to help cities become more open, to become more interoperable with each other, and that their services are interoperable. So they're developing together with different partners the minimum interoperability mechanisms. They call it MIMS. And there have been already 3 MIMS adopted: the marketplace, common data models, and context information management. And 2 of them, Fair AI and personal data management, is yet in the works. And of course, from MyData perspective, the personal data management, the MIM4, is really important for us. What they're doing is that they're building it or developing it on the basis of really the city of Helsinki, how they're also deploying these services in order to then inform also how these kind of mechanisms should be designed. what is important that the cities themselves and the communities are involved in that process so that they can really practice and inform how these should be implemented later on, and provide cities really the minimum common ground to implement those mechanisms later on. This is just a snapshot. There's a lot of work happening also elsewhere. For the sake of time, I'll keep it here and go towards looking into the future. What still needs to be happening in order to put really MyData into practice. And while there's many different pilots and innovation going on anyway in the ecosystem, I would like to highlight a couple of next steps. When you're working with the city, I think it's really important that you also commit to the journey of interoperability to make sure that whenever those services are rolled out, they become possible to also build on top of each other, that they're providing a meaningful choice for the citizens and for the communities. Next up, I think it's important to work on top of other work that has already been rolled out. And so keep on using the MIMS, minimum interoperability mechanisms, and develop and build on top of those. It's important to figure out better and appropriate data governance models. That was also advocated, I think, from Ruben's presentation. And to figure out how the different governance models, like even data collaboratives, cooperatives, data fiduciaries, traditional governance models, all fit together, and how they can exist side by side. It's so important to continue raising awareness and competencies between or among the data professionals as well as policymakers in the city, to help them also even ask really good and tricky questions when they're engaging into or kind of going into those partnerships, but also raise awareness among the individuals and citizens themselves to ask and demand for better services. And as was mentioned by the work of Fing in the playbook, really look for use cases and start from the important goals that are relevant for the city, because there's more value to be gained. So let's continue to make it happen. I think it's been already said by both Jana and Ruben and the hosts today that collaboration is key. So I look forward to stay in touch with you and not only to make it happen, but as MyData slogan says, and to also make it right and keep that balance well. I leave you here also some key resources where to read more about MyData, and would be, of course, very glad to see some of you joining us, our members, either individuals or organizational members. And most of all, I hope to stay in touch. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Sille, for that insightful presentation of what is happening in cities and in MyData. So, yes, questions, please. I have a couple. I have to choose the most difficult one, I guess. Yes, this data in cities. So how do cities tackle the question of data commons, data trust, storage of this data? And is this moving towards the idea of European data spaces? Do you think?
Yeah. So like it really depends also the level of digitalization in cities. I believe that this is one of the risks that the cities are, the kind of understanding of those issues among different cities are very different, and there's a risk that this divide is only increasing. But the bigger cities can really be the kind of how's it called, the lighthouse projects, or kind of lighthouse cities to steward also other work in other cities. And yeah, what they're trying to support also communities to use the data about them to make it accessible to the individuals, to the communities, and then make sure that they can generate those insights. But what is of course tricky and what can stay as a stopper is when there's friction coming from the regulation itself or the need to protect data, and it seemed that any kind of use of or sharing of data is a stopper for or potentially is a risk for misuse of data and breaches of that. So I think that is one of the key things to be developing that needs to be developing in the work of cities. That how can we make sure that it's not either or, but we can build on top of protected ways of sharing data and still make use of that as well.
Thank you. So this is a very interesting topic, but unfortunately we have to move on to the next one due to time. So thank you, Sille.